gain of some kind or power of some kind at my expense. And folks that are just focused on this all the time, over and over and over again, and are not taking on the larger issues of justice, I've got to tell you, listen carefully to what they say and count how often they say it, and then begin to draw your own conclusions about whose side they're on. Are they mounting power for themselves, or are they really seeking God's justice?
So now you get a question. Okay, here's your question, Harry. Every religious denomination, I don't mean just Christian, every religious denomination decides what constitutes acceptable and unacceptable behavior. Rules, if you wish. And generally, they limit membership in that denomination to those who accept the rules. So, if a certain group of Christians decides that in their particular denomination that men aren't allowed to have sex with men, what's the problem? I mean, why can't you let these congregations make their own rules, worship together with whomever they please? And at the same time, why can't men who have sex with men form their own churches that are welcoming and affirming, as in fact so many lesbian, gay, transgender, and bisexual communities have already done? In social, if not in political settings, why isn't separate, if equal, politically acceptable?
Well, it is happily in the United States of America still under our Constitution true. Did you hear all those clauses on the way to true? It is still true that each denomination and each local church has the right to believe whatever it chooses to do so. And thanks be to God, the framers of our Constitution were wise enough to put us in that position so that we can agree to disagree. It is also true that those churches are not in this nation supposed to be telling the rest of us what to do and making laws based on those religious beliefs. Their morality should be informing the government, but the government should never be imposing morality as it understands it on its people. That's just not the way the system is supposed to work. But right now, we are doing that in this country. And there is a real movement afoot to create a theocracy in the United States of America, to have right-wing fundamentalist Christians control the government of the United States. You see it in the debates in the Republican primaries right now. You've heard it for 8 years. It's getting worse and worse and worse. They really do want to tell all of us how to believe and how to act and how to live on a moment-to-moment basis. And if you think they will stop with homosexual people, think again. Because as soon as they get with us, they'll get with you. Now, it is very disturbing to me that people think that our working for change in our denominations is somehow a blight on those denominations. I worked to change the United Church of Christ from the inside out because I was a member of the United Church of Christ. It is my church family. And I have a responsibility to that family to have it live up to the standards that I believe God sets for us. And so I offer myself and my gifts of ministry to the church, and I call on the church to accept them and those of my sisters and brothers who are lesbian and gay, not to stir up trouble and not to get our ever-loving rights, but to call the church to be the best that it can be and to model for the church all that it can be. We seek to take this great gift we have been given from God and to give it to the church, and it's working. We are talking about marriage in this country because gay people have asked for it. We weren't talking about marriage before that. We're talking about sexuality now in ways that we've never talked about before because lesbian and gay people have been honest, and I'm proud of that.
Well, here's where I have to take exception and say, I'm hearing some fear tactics, Harry. I've spoken tonight. I've offered public apologies for the shortcoming of the gay and lesbian church. I've commended you for sharing your life story in short so that people can be more sensitive. I began by confessing the rampant sin in the heterosexual church and said there's no self-righteousness. Me and people like me have been called intellectually lazy. I'm doing this to gain power. I'm manipulating, calling for theocracy. We'll get into that in the next question for me, but point of fact, I am who I am. I've written 20 books. Not one of them yet is on homosexuality. We have a ministry school. Not one course is devoted to homosexual issues. We are doing more to help poor and hurting people around the world than probably anybody you know for a group as small as we are. That's what we live for. That's what we give our life for. However, we've also been contending about marriage issues for decades. Before homosexual issues were ever on my horizon, we were dealing with pornography issues, we were dealing with rampant divorce, we were dealing with breakdown of respect for men and women. And in point of fact, the reason that Christian leaders led the way in the abolition movement and led the way in improving the rights of women is because the same texts that spoke about certain things in terms of order and decorum also gave seeds of liberation for those very people, whereas the New Testament does not give seeds of liberation for practicing homosexuality, it gives seeds of liberation for transformation. And I think it's a crying shame that the experience of many, many gays and lesbians who have come out of homosexuality is despised, is mocked. They're accused of doing it for money. They're ridiculed. Here are people who've had to come out twice. They've had to come out first to say, I'm gay, and then they've had to come out of that, and they've gone through pain and trauma, and they're mocked for it, and they're ridiculed for it. Where's the mercy? Where's the compassion? Where's the justice? Why does it go only one way? And with all the talk about sexuality, saying you're glad that gays and lesbians have brought this to the table, then please renounce the perversions in the books edited by scholars that you work with at the HRC. Please give me just a fig leaf of some possibility that you actually say these things actually are wrong. By God's grace, I want to stand for truth and do what's right. It hurts me that it hurts other people in the process, but sometimes love hurts. It heals in the end.
So, Michael, we raised briefly the question of theocracy. And as you noted, having seen the questions in advance, this question ends up with exactly that, right? Okay, so you note I've quoted in each of these. This time I want to quote not from the Bible, but from the Constitution of the United States. Here is part of the First Amendment to the Constitution, Article 1 of what we refer to as the Bill of Rights. It says, Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. Now, that is, as has been noted, that's why you and other Christian conservatives have the right to define for yourselves what your religion is and means to you, to both preach and practice as you see fit without the state, without the government having any right to tell you what to do or what not to do. That's essential to a democratic society, right? But where in the Constitution does any religion, not just Christianity, but where does any religion get the right to people who are not members of that religion, what they can and can't do? And doesn't that fundamentally violate the constitutional separation of church and state? And if anyone is doing that, are they in fact violating the freedom that is guaranteed by the Constitution? And wouldn't, as I think Harry said earlier, preempting the question, but that's okay, doesn't that kind of a move, in effect, move the United States in the direction of being what's called a theocracy? A theocracy is a nation that is ruled by one religion, rather than a democracy, a nation that is hopefully ruled by all the people.
Another great question. So first, as a Jewish follower of Jesus, I know Jewish history decently well, and theocracies scare me. So I have no interest in theocracy. If anyone tells you we're going in that direction, I have to say fear tactic, nothing less, because that's not the direction that I'm going or advocating. And of course, the Constitution and First Amendment don't actually speak of separation in church and state. That term, of course, comes from Thomas Jefferson's letter to the Baptists in the early 1800s. But let me tell you what I believe our role is. I'll quote Dr. Martin Luther King. The church must be reminded that it is not the master of the state or the servant of the state, but rather the conscience of the state. It must be the guide and critic of the state and never its tool. If the church does not recapture its prophetic zeal, it will become an irrelevant social club without moral or spiritual authority. So first, I'm acting as a citizen. I have the right to act as a citizen, as does Harry. Although I differ with the agenda of the Human Rights Campaign and he with mine, we both have that constitutional right. We're not going to hurt, kill, attack each other. So I'm going to seek what I can do to inform Congress, to vote accordingly, to speak up, to act, etc., in a nonviolent, non-intimidating way in the spirit of Christ, but as a citizen. I also realize that many of our laws are still based on biblical principles. In other words, the law "do not murder" is not just a general society law, it does come from Scripture. So there are certain laws that are